Dear Lord, thank you for just another evening service, Father. Thank you that you will you will be able to speak through Deepak, Father. As far as technology is concerned, Lord, I know that our culture has a big uh, influence with that, and Lord, I pray that you will be able to speak to Deepak with that, and if there's any questions that need to be answered, Lord, I pray that you will put it on our minds. Remember to ask, Father, and just also just be obedient with the technology that you have given us here to be able to use, even for your good, Lord. And I thank you, Father, for your Son Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Oh, everyone just.
Scheduling.
Yeah, apparently so.
It has said it was the old people.
Well,
But if so, that bunch is part of us. Oh, no, you can start.
I hope everyone online got notes.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, but he's next to me.
Yeah.
It's not-
So on the stream, is the sound silent?
Yes.
Yeah.
They
You
just-
know, it's,
Keep that from the mic.
you know, that's-
All right, so before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Next week is our last week of this class, which is Q and A. So anything that you've been thinking about the last, I guess by now this will be ninth week. The last 9 weeks, any questions? We're having a whole hour dedicated just for question and answers. And also there's this new booklet that we got. It's called the New Reformation Catechism on Human Sexuality. So this is different from the catechism that we do on Sunday mornings. This is specifically related to some of the five lies, but like the human sexuality. So just like our catechism, it goes through Q and A, and it kind of talks, specifically about sexuality issues, and it gives a lot of Bible references. So if you want to kind of a quicker resource on what is it, what do we believe, and why we believe it, it's good. And there are 20 copies over there. So even those who are online, when you get here next Sunday morning, you can get one. All right, so with that, we can get started on tonight's topic, which is the wolf in our pockets, how the social internet spreads false teaching. So first, I did not come up with the title, it's actually the title of one of the books. But yeah, it goes on theme with the graphic that we picked, and last week when we talked about Stephen Wolf. And
Different spelling.
yeah. So yeah, so we're gonna be talking about the internet and putting through these notes. I know we can kind of have a whole class for this. We talk about this for weeks and weeks, kind of going through the sections in here, but I tried to focus as much as I could on just internet and false teaching. So we'll see how it goes. So, all right, so in session 2 of our class, we looked at how to protect against false teaching. And a quick recap of that is that there are 3 areas where we can protect against false doctrine. They're biblical pastoral leadership, corporate spiritual growth, and faithful church discipline. So with those 3 areas, even with that, we know that false teachers, they can be removed from the pulpit. They can even be thrown out of the church. And yet we see these false teachings spreading. And if you look around most evangelical churches, they do not get obviously false teachings from the pulpit. At least initially they don't. It seems like mostly kind of this false teaching infiltrates the church and then it gets to the pulpit. But there's another source that is shaping and discipling congregations more than the local pastor. And that is the social internet. So tonight will be an exercise in the second area of protecting against false teaching, which is corporate spiritual growth. And our goal is to observe well and think deeply about the social internet and how it affects us. So when we talk about the social internet, our first instinct might be to All right, so if you're saying social internet is wrong, let me just delete all my social media apps and log off. Well, that could be an appropriate reason for certain situations. I quoted the verse from Matthew where Jesus says to, you know, if your eye causes you to sin, or if your hand causes you to sin, it's better to cut it off. Which, you know, for certain situations or certain, you know, periods of our life, you know, maybe it's a good idea to delete the internet if you can. But what in reality though, the internet, we are like fish, and the social internet is the water around us. So, and there's no escaping it. And moreover, it's kind of really hard to think about this because, you know, fish don't really know that they're in water. This is, you know, where they're born in. And sometimes the most important, obvious realities around us, they are the hardest to talk about, the hardest to think through. And also, we are intentionally talking about the social internet and not just social media. Because the internet is inherently social. So even if you're not on Facebook or Twitter or wherever, if you just go online, you're part of this social internet. Because what is the internet? It's, you know, computers talking to each other. That's how they invented it. I believe the first network was between UCLA and Berkeley, where during the Cold War, we tried to come up with a way to pass military secrets without using traditional media. And that's how they built the network, and that kind of eventually became the internet.
So it wasn't Al Gore.
I was thinking that, but I'm not gonna throw it out there.
You don't want to mess things up.
Chief Hawk, what did Mike say?
Mike asked if it wasn't Al Gore. Actually, it might have been between UCLA and Stanford and not Berkeley. Somewhere in California. And then also, you know, just the internet has been shaped by the people who created the systems. So, you know, even before social media was a thing, you know, if we can think back, if those of us are old enough, you know, what was the first time we went online and what was the reason? If we got an email, the email was social, we were talking to people. Or even today, even if you do like a Google search, when you start typing and it doesn't autocomplete, where's that autocomplete from? That's from other people who've done similar searches, so we're being influenced by what other people are searching. So what's trending online, it shapes the nightly news, our workplace conversations, political discourse, activism, and we see that more and more every day, right? Governments get toppled over, there are riots in the streets based on people organizing stuff online. So, yeah, so that's why it's like the water around us, there's no escaping it. And our next response might be, well, that might be true that we're all online, but I don't listen to any bad teachers online. So, you know, this doesn't really affect me. So that might be true in terms of, you know, those we follow or those we like online. But the internet, it shapes us more than we realize. So, you know, I'll try to kind of explain more on what I mean by that in a bit. So, you know, so if the internet is the water that we're swimming in, what if the water is poison? That's what we'll look at tonight. So while the internet essentially gives us unlimited access to all of human knowledge, what we need to think through these issues is wisdom. And biblical wisdom is holistic. It's more than just, you know, wisdom that we say is, you know, it comes from experience, or wisdom as in making the right decisions. Wisdom is living a life that corresponds correctly to reality. And Tremper Longman, who's a theologian, he describes wisdom as being in 3 levels. You have the skill of living, which is practical, becoming a good person, which is ethical, and fearing God, theological. And all 3 levels together is what wisdom is. All right, so first we'll look at the content of the social internet. So when it comes to the social internet, we either ignore it as a fact, which we already saw that, you know, we can't really ignore it, it's the water around us, or we uncritically embrace it, which is at the other end of the spectrum. We give up personal data, we overshare, we mindlessly scroll, and we do it uncritically because social media is free. And if you go to your app store and you look at the list of free apps, it's usually social media apps are at the very top. It's free and it asks very little of us, so we don't question its costs or the effects it has on us. But what we do know is that as believers, we are to choose good, edifying content over bad, which is from Philippians 4:8, which reads, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So that's what we should be about, even on the internet. And also, we know that we should limit our time spent online so that we don't ignore our other commitments. But I don't know about you, but I know that this is very hard. I know that this is what I'm supposed to do, but I don't do that. And, could it be that maybe we don't have as much control as we think we do? So we're gonna take a quick look at kind of the history of, not just the internet, but what technology is. So the effects of the fall means sin messed up our relationship with God and God's creation. So, you want to go this way? Can you get Genesis 3:16 to 19?
Actually, didn't bring my big puddles.
Oh, I didn't. Oh.
This is 3:16.
19, 16 to 19.
Says this, to the woman, he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, and he shall rule over you. To Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face shall you eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return.
Right, thank you. So that is God cursing humans after the fall. And technology exists so that we can make the effects of the fall a bit more manageable. So from what we heard, we have agriculture and technology in agriculture so that, the toiling of the ground is made a little bit more manageable. Or we have medical technology so that childbirth can be made a little bit more manageable, or ultimately medical technology is there so that we can kind of fight against death. And so technology is actually one of God's gifts. It's God's gift of common grace towards us. But technology itself is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. And this comes from a social, I guess he's a social technologist. And it's one of the laws that this person said that technology is neither good nor bad, not neutral. And you're probably thinking, like, what does that mean? So Tony Reinke explains this. He explains it as no technology is ambivalent. Each one comes with certain biases and tendencies. The true challenge of ethics is not in determining which technology should be made possible, but in determining how those new technologies are wielded. The scripture puts the emphasis not on the technology, but on how those innovations are used. So Tony Reinke would be someone we would describe as a technology optimist. He's very much for technology. He thinks that all technology is under God's providence. So he's for new technology, but he talks about how, we need to be thinking about what is the point of this technology? How are we using it? And that's where we need to be thinking and deciding on what's the best use of it. And so the danger here is that technology can easily become idolatry. So we have problems from the curse of the fall, and technology can be used to manage it, but we can easily make that our idolatry, so we place our trust in created things over the creator. And another way to think about this is that the social internet is like our Tower of Babel, in that we have this one common place to gather and build and communicate. We have the whole world gathered on social media. And even if people are speaking different languages, which was one of the effects of the Tower of Babel, today there's automatic translation, right? If you go on Facebook and someone's posting in a different language, it'll give you a translate. Sometimes it's not very accurate, but for the most part, it gets the job done. So, people all around the world can communicate with each other. So we use it to demonstrate our self-sufficiency, our independence, and our ingenuity, which is what, people back then in Genesis were doing. But then the other side is that we're also unlike Babel in that we are already spread out. We have different cultures and worldviews, and this causes our online communities to break apart and for discourse to get ugly. And we talked about some of this earlier in our class where, words have different meanings to different people now. So words like tolerance or love, it used to mean something, now it means something else. So, people go online and we're kind of talking past each other. So we think we have this great place where, humans are coming together, united to, have this community. But then we see in reality what happens that, we are talking past each other. So since the social internet is all around us, we exercise caution and discernment. And we're to avoid not just the sinful content online. So typically when we think of the internet, we think of like, I need to avoid the X-rated stuff. But it's not just that, we also should be avoiding the unhelpful stuff, the unnecessary and the superfluous material. But what if that isn't enough? So this next part here's where I want to focus on. And I know for me personally that, typically when I thought of the internet, I always used to think of just the content and, I need to avoid the bad and, go with the good. So if I stop watching binging a show and if I watch like a sermon online or something, I feel good about myself. But then here's kind of where I'm being challenged that, though in terms of the form of the internet, the very nature of the social internet shapes us. So it doesn't matter what you're doing online, it's still shaping us. It changes how we think, feel, and live. So when we just focus on just the content online, we're merely fighting symptoms instead of treating the underlying disease. So the research says that an average person spends 6 to 7 hours a day online, and out of that 2 to 3 hours are on social media. So when we do spend this much time online, our values become aligned with the values of where we spend the most time. So Samuel James says, we participate in digital liturgies that are soul shaping. So liturgy is kind of what we do on Sunday morning, right? We have an order of service, we do the same thing every week. And it's also why we practice spiritual disciplines. I read the Bible every morning, that, reading that hour time I'm spending that morning doesn't feel life-changing, but over the course of your life, whatever little time you're spending, it adds up. And that's the same thing with, whatever we're doing, especially online, that you spend enough time doing the same thing over and over again, that's going to change you. So the values of this, so whatever is the values of the internet, we kind of slowly adapt to that. So these are the values of the social internet. It's entertainment, attention, and identity. And actually all three of them are very interlinked with each other. So attention is the primary currency of the social internet. And if you want to understand this, I said that you can see the movie Ralph Breaks the Internet. I don't know if anybody's seen that before, but yeah, that explains, especially if you want to talk about this to, little kids, that's a good way to kind of, introduce this conversation of, how does the internet work and why are certain things popular on the internet? And actually, while we're on the topic of movies, another good movie to talk about these things with kids is Ron's Gone Wrong, which it kind of is basically talking about why kids want a phone, and instead of a phone, they actually make it like a little robot that follows you around. But it truly, in the movies, one kid doesn't have it and he really longs for it, but then it talks about the effects of the kids who do have it, the anxiety that they deal with, and just how they feel like they're always performing to someone online. So yeah, another movie that we can start as a starting point for these conversations. The other Ron's Gone Wrong. All right, so what is most entertaining online? That's given the most attention. And then how much attention one receives becomes an important part of one's identity. So this means that whatever is new, something that's novel, is prioritized over truth. And what is viral and popular is prioritized over what's unchanging and eternal. So and so it's not just that these are the values of the internet, but we're bombarded with so much content, which, for example, however many hundreds of friends that you have, you're following their posts. We can have our personalized news feeds, and then we want to follow up on what's trending globally. And then, we get all our dings from all the different apps that we have installed. So just all of this content that's coming in, it's impossible for us to carefully think through each piece of information that comes through our screens. So instead of trying to, try to think through it and screen what we're trying to do, we mindlessly scroll. And then when it comes to reading, we're just skimming through headlines. And then we're instinctively liking or reacting to posts. And then we're engaging with clickbait. I'm assuming everyone knows what clickbait is. Those things that say, 5 ways, blah, blah, blah.
Shocking.
And then we're constantly switching between apps. And so we do all of this, and yet we're unable to turn it off because our brains are programmed for a dopamine reward when we encounter something that we truly appreciate, and we keep looking for the next hit. And then along with searching for the next high, we also fear missing out on something important, which is what in online speak we call it FOMO. So this leads to anxiety and stress. So among all this content that's coming in, you want to make sure that something that we think is really important, we want to make sure we're on top of that. And there's a correlation between poor mental health and time spent on social media. So, mental health is another one of those, like you can spend a whole day talking about it, and there are many factors that go into that, but like it says, social media is one of the factors. It's one of the major factors, especially for certain age groups. So our relationship with the social internet, it makes us feel like we are never successful, pretty, or interesting enough. So this goes back to the values. So if I post something online and if I don't get enough attention that I feel like I deserve, then that's when we feel like we're never successful, pretty, or interesting. And that's because we compare our offline lives with its ups and downs to the lives of other people who have their manicured, filtered photos and posts. So other people are posting their highlights while we are comparing our ups and downs against their highlights. So it's like, why is everyone always having a great time, but my life is like this? So this leads to discouragement and discontent within our own hearts, and we don't get the attention we feel we deserve. So all of this shapes the type of information we share and the content we create online. So instead of long, thoughtful pieces, we favor short visual content aimed at engagement, and we go for likes over integrity and truth. This is because, as we already saw, attention sells, so we're going for that. And then the next point is we're deceived into thinking that we belong to communities online. But the social internet, it actually discourages vulnerability and depth. So, one of the things is, how often do you see people apologizing online? That's just not something that sells, So, things like that are, just the nature of the internet discourages us, so. And those are things that we need to have true community, so. Communities online, there are some good aspects to it, but ultimately, if we put all our hopes on the online communities, it ends up disappointing us. And then, but when it comes to creation, the internet treats all creators equally, without any checks for expertise or authority, which is the Wikipedia model. So, if we're editing an article on Wikipedia for physics, it doesn't matter if you have a PhD or, if you're just old enough to get online, you all have the same access to edit stuff and, have your content get up there. The internet assumes that we're all inherently good and that we only speak truth, which is unlike what scripture says about human nature and original sin and how we truly are. So if someone was born in a small town a century ago, in general, they would have had the same worldview as his neighbors until he went to college. So the most formative force in this person's life would have been family, friends, and church. So today, that same person in that same town, even before college, would have spent more time talking to people across the globe as soon as they got a phone or a laptop. Through the social internet, they would have spent more time talking to people across the globe than their neighbor, their pastor, or even his parents. And in a sense, this is good because we're exposed to a diversity of worldviews in the safety of our parents' home. So, we can ask questions, we can learn things before we go out, typically before we go out to college. But social media, it doesn't directly challenge our worldview. it slowly and silently deceives us into thinking that meaning and fulfillment can be found in an online experience rather than our faith. So the ultimate deception of social media is that, it's not trying to challenge our beliefs, but it's like, here, look at this cat video online and so on. So that is the form of the internet. And then now I want to kind of get into specifics on how the internet affects some of the false teachings that we've been talking about. So our first session on the 5 lies, we started talking about expressive individualism, which is the spirit of the age. So we got a quote here from, I believe it's Samuel James again. Most people in the modern secular world believe that the key to their happiness, fulfillment, and quest for meaning in life is to arrange things so that their inner desires and ambitions can be totally achieved. Life's center of gravity, according to expressive individualism, is the self. And this is our secular creed. It is the pervasive theme that's behind every chart-topping song, every box office hit movie and video game. And it's been taught in education and self-help books. But what made this idea of expressive individualism become so ingrained in who we are as modern 21st century people? And Samuel James argues that, you got these philosophical developments that was going on, but alongside that, there was a revolution in digital technology, and social media provided the most important, most enchanting, and most effective vehicle for expressive individualism. And, this is true if we think back to our online experience, first time you go online, if it's email or whatever website, it asks you to create a username. And, recently there was a whole thing on social media about how you have to use your real name, but except for that, even that is kind of gone now. But for the most part, for the history of the internet, you make up a username, so that becomes you online, and you can do whatever you want. It's not linked to your offline life. And then if you do something you don't like, or if you just want to break, you can go ahead and create a different username, and then you have a new persona to play around with. That's kind of the spirit of expressive individualism. And it's funny, this past elder meeting, we set up a ChatGPT account for Mike. And Mike asked, like, why is it asking me for personal information? And instinctively, Wes and I were like, well, just make something up. Because, that's what we're used to.
They simultaneous. Oh, yeah, you guys are born after the internet. Well, Wes says he was born in the internet.
So that is, the spirit of the age there, and the internet kind of brought that about.
I held my ground.
So what this becomes next is that, we have a world that's mediated through screens. And another quote here, this time from Chris Martin, which, that's where if you look at the footnotes there, that's where I get the title, The Wolf, he calls it The Wolf in Their Pockets. Because the social internet is a virtual world of its own making, we can mold and shape our experience with the social internet in such a way that it feels especially tailored to us. The core of our original sin, one would say, is to be gods of our own making, rather than being in a relationship with the God of the universe. So the social internet, with the ability to create, to curate, to cancel, makes us feel godlike. But then we have problems with this. We don't always know how to use this ability to curate our feeds well. So we end up taking advice from someone just because they're funny, or self-confident, or Instagram savvy. Or I really like what Rosaria Butterfield says. She says that we're getting our advice from what some famous, almost Christian feminist blogger thinks on Twitter. Elisa Childers, who was one of the other authors, she kind of explains this, us getting advice from people online is like, if you're in an airplane and the pilot comes on and says, thank you so much for flying today. This is my first time flying a plane. I've done a whole bunch of tutorials, but don't be worried. I know how to do this. Now, what would be your instinct? You'd want to get up and run away. But online, you're totally okay. I'm getting advice. So, she gives examples of like, someone was recently divorced talking about marriage. People
Yeah.
listen to that person thinking, oh, they're being so raw and authentic. And that's how we follow people who are like deconstructing their faith online. And then the other dangers here is that sometimes what we think is safe, it changes over time. There are activist pressures that make TV shows introduce LGBTQ characters to even the littlest of kids. So I actually have a link down here to a Gospel Coalition article, which especially if you have little kids, you should check it out. He gives 3 examples, Peppa Pig, Cocomelon, how, those are things that people have been thinking has been safe, but recently they've been introducing stuff that we wouldn't find safe anymore. And he also gives an example of Mr. Beast, who I believe is like the second most popular YouTube channel, and how he was someone who was just doing pranks online, but then he had a friend who is trans now, and because of that, they've been talking about a lot of that content online. So, things, it's not like a one and done thing, it's like, this is safe or not safe, like things keep changing. And then something even more disturbing than that is that sometimes the recommendation algorithms, they lead us to media that are knockoff versions of popular things, but they actually contain disturbing and inappropriate content. So again, I have a article, this is a BBC article that says there are YouTube videos that are tricking children. And I think again, the example is Peppa Pig, where you watch an actual Peppa Pig clip, and then on the side you get recommendations, stuff that looks like Peppa Pig, but slowly they get darker and darker, and it like introduces guns and a whole bunch of stuff that you wouldn't want the little kids to be watching. So what we think is our carefully curated feeds online, they can be easily infiltrated by the teachings of the world. So now is it any wonder that, faithful churchgoers, they express unorthodox views in pressing matters? Because they're being discipled by the social internet. So, we can think of any of the lies that we covered in our class so far. People go online, we're looking for, solid teaching, or maybe have questions on something and we search for stuff online. And without knowing, we can be led into stuff that, it's not orthodox teaching.
Could I say something briefly, Deepak?
Yes.
My youngest 2 kids have told me, Mom, YouTube Kids is worse than regular YouTube. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's, they're seeing that it's stuff that is aimed for kids, geared for kids. Parents mindlessly think, oh, YouTube Kids, that one's safe for my kids to go on, and so parents aren't necessarily vetting all that content. But, my kids have come to me and said, no, YouTube Kids is worse. We would rather just be on regular YouTube. They go on the channels that,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
And I think the reason for that is they had regular YouTube, and then Google said like, we're making YouTube Kids because this is how we're making things safer. And, the bad guys also know what is the, the algorithm behind
Right.
what's making it safer. So they know how to exploit the algorithm.
This is where all of the unsupervised kids are.
Yeah.
That's what.
So they're
predators
intentionally
understand.
targeting that.
Exactly, yeah.
And the next item I want to talk about is immersive media. So there are role-playing video games and virtual reality. It further adds to this disembodied nature of modern media. By disembodied, your offline world is completely separate from your online world. So, the most popular video games online, there's a genre called MMORPG. I'm assuming most of you don't know that. It stands for Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game. So you log in, you can select, so you create your character. So you can select your gender, you can select skin tones, and your height, weight, whatever you want. Various other options, and as you play the game, you're getting real-time feedback, both from the computer AI system as well as other people around the world as you're playing with others. So this type of experimentation, it recalibrates our worldview and it reshapes our consciences to not see the goodness in our given bodies. So this causes us to either become obsessed with our bodies, wanting to become slimmer, fitter, stronger, or prettier, which will inevitably lead to shame and disappointment, or we become hostile to our bodies, which we can, see that in transgenderism. So it's not saying that video games is causing, people to become trans, but, this is kind of, it's how the worldview gets pushed. So even those who aren't necessarily trans, but people who are supporting, who are affirming trans they are being shaped by this worldview that, you know, it's totally okay for me to go online and I can, you know, shape my own character and, you know, experiment with that. And what's wrong with that if people do that in real life? It's the same thing we've been doing online for, you know, decades now. And another issue is tribalism. So this is a quote. Well, let me read it and explain it where this is from. Our algorithms exploit the human brain's attraction to decide divisiveness. If left unchecked, Facebook would feed users more and more divisive content in an effort to gain user attention and increase time on the platform. So this is from Facebook's internal researchers, which they presented it, I believe, in like 2018. So this was 2 years after the whole election fiasco of 2016 and how Facebook was under so much pressure from everyone. So 2 years later, you know, research like this internally came, but Facebook ignored it and they never shared it with the public. This is because divisive content is the most attractive content online. So it says the most engaging content on social media is called outgroup animosity, which is when one group posts content about an opposing group that is rather negative. And this has created a world where cyber mobs engage in harassment, bullying, doxing, trolling, and other negative online behavior. So instead of us going online and saying this is awesome, if I say like, you know, this is really bad, if I hate on something, that's the content itself. That's the content that people like to give their attention to. So yes, we saw all of those different ways that social media is shaping it. So tribalism, especially, I want to mention one thing. Is tribalism is kind of what causes stuff like Christian nationalism, right? We go online, we follow people, and we're like, okay, I like this person because he's a Christian, calling out, you know, what's going on in the secular world. But then with this kind of tribalist mindset that steps in, it's like, all right, I'm part of this group, and I'm against this group, and my leader on this site can never do anything wrong. Unlike what Mike was saying about John Calvin, that, you know, the best of us are only 80% right. But when you're going online and you get in this tribalist mindset, my leader will never say anything wrong, so it doesn't matter that he might be saying some, you know, stuff that's not very orthodox, but as long as he's attacking the bad guys, I'm with them. And that's kind of what leads to stuff like what we looked at last week, Christian nationalism. All right, so now, you know, trying to get practical here, how do we engage? So I actually have a lot of stuff here that I don't know if you have time to go over all of that. I really want to get to spend a lot of time on the conclusion. So this is kind of the practical part. So instead of the extremes of either having uncritical embrace or passive ignorance, we want our relationship with the social media to be one of intentional engagement. So yes, I've been kind of doing my research across different authors, and every single one of them says that, you know, we're not supposed to just abandon the internet. We're still supposed to engage, but it has to be intentional engagement. But one of the problems with that is that, you know, this is all fairly new. If you look through my footnotes, most of the books are stuff that came out within the last 3 to 5 years. It's not like we have someone who wrote the kind of the ultimate way to engage media like 100 years ago, and people have been following that advice and it's been working out well, right? We're all still trying to figure this out. So, you know, there's some questions to ask and some habits to form that we can quickly look at. So Tim Talley says, recommends that we ask 4 questions when a new technology comes along. You know, so something like Apple's new goggles thing, it's called Vision Pro. And we've seen the whole goggles thing. So, you know, so before you kind of decide to engage in something like that, you know, these are some of the questions you ask, like what human trait or sense or experience is enhanced by this technology. So the example would be like, you know, a fork is an extension of the human hand. And what technology is being made obsolete? What old technology is this thing bringing back to mind? And what are some unintended opposite effects this technology might have? So for example, like Gutenberg, he was a faithful Catholic. But you know, the printing press, little did he know that the printing press is a major reason for the Protestant Reformation. So even stuff like, you know, when we get our smartphones, they say like, you know, you're going to be so productive. But then what happens? I'm wasting my time on my phone. So along with that, Chris Martin suggests asking questions like, what is the purpose of, you know, whatever this technology in my life? And in what ways is this technology shaping, he talks about, how I think about current events, but, it could be like, how am I engaging my family? Is this technology making me stare at my screen when my, kids start scrolling for the first time? Those are the things that we should be thinking about. And then some habits to form. So we have this little visual aid here from Brett McCracken, which is kind of shaped like the food pyramid, where you have the sources of information, which go from the bottom up. It goes foundational to the optional. So we have 6 sections here. So the Bible is the most foundational for believers, and then you have the church, you have nature, books, beauty, and then the social internet on top. So when it comes to truth, we go to the foundational sources first and foremost, and then we go up the pyramid as time permits, and those are kind of optional things. And then in addition, First Martin recommends that we study history, we value silence, we pursue humility, establish accountability, and build friendships. And then Andy Crouch, he gets really practical. He has a book about the TechWise family, how his family has adopted these 10 TechWise commitments. And there are a lot of them, which, we already kind of talked about in some of our questions and habits, but these 4 kind of things apply the most to us. We develop a rhythm of work and rest. So he recommends that 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, and 1 week a year, we turn off our devices completely. And we worship, peace, play, and rest together. And then another commitment is that we wake up before our devices do, and they go to bed before we do.
We put them in bed.
When you're charging your phone, it's sleeping.
And probably in a room that we are not going to bed in.
And then we fill the center of our home with things that reward skill and active engagement. So the center of a modern living room would be the television. But he recommends that you should want to put like a crafting with your little kids, so that if they're waiting for something or if they're bored, that's where they're going. And his family seems like they're a really creative family, so they talk about how they have a piano in the center of their living room. So but yeah, we can tailor that to our families. And then another thing is spouses have one another's passwords, and parents have total access to children's devices, which is some of the accountability stuff that the previous person talked about. And then we have some specific suggestions on how to use the social internet. We go online with a purpose, and we stay online only as long as we need to. So it's only when we give into an unconscious impulse to hop on the phone and just go somewhere that leads to dangerous outcomes. So, if I want to check the weather, I decide that I'm going to take 30 seconds to check the weather, and I'm going to get out. I'm not going to be distracted. If you go to the weather app, they're like, check out this tornado, and you will watch that video, or there's some climate alarmism going on where someone's trying to like scare you, and you end up spending like 20 minutes there and you're mad about the world. So that's what he's talking about here. We choose quality over quantity, looking for recommendations from trusted sources. Not the algorithms, but like people we know personally, and limiting our consumption. So that would be like, try to watch one show at a time, not binge through like 5 different things, or, listen to one podcast at a time. And, you will never just, there's so much stuff online that we are never gonna get to, read or watch or listen to all the good stuff. There's only so much we can do with not finite lives, and we should be okay with that. And in general, we slow down. Instead of reading what's trending or the hottest take, things that matter will endure after the novelty wears off, and we can engage them then. So like this past week, I believe, was 1 year after the whole Ashbury revival that happened. So like a year ago, everyone was talking about it, and there's so much back and forth going on. But this last week, I think I only found like 1 article of someone talking about it. But it was really thoughtful. He actually, he I don't know if it was he, but whoever wrote it, they actually took the time. I think they even called the churches in that area to see if the revival actually made any impact. So those are the things that we should be after, that instead of getting into that whatever's going on a year ago where people are all about this online. And then we
Well,
do.
I What was that, Deepak, that they were wrapped up in a year ago and now are not or something?
The Ashbury Revival, it was a university in Kentucky, I think.
Aspirator?
Ashbury,
Still can't hear that. Spell it.
Ashbury,
Never mind.
I can type it for you.
Okay, just text it to me.
Okay. The next thing is we diversify our exposure. So instead of demonizing those we dislike, we truly seek to understand the other perspective. So we should be able to summarize the opposition's position in a way that they would actually agree that, this is what I believe. And then that's when we don't try to argue with straw men online. And then we share what is good. We should be about the public praising of others rather than self-promotion or virtue signaling. And we honor people instead of shaming them. And so even with all of the dangers of the social internet, we still choose to engage and we don't abandon it. So if you're all living in the online world today, Jesus's prayer for the church in John 17, where he's talking about how he wants this church to be in the world, but not of the world. So today it means that we're not just to be not of the online world, but Jesus is sent into this online world, because that's where the world is gathering. And throughout church history, Christians have risked their own health to bring healing to leper colonies, Ebola-stricken nations, and plague-infested medieval cities. So we go online, we wear a full-body hazmat suit if needed, flashlight, stay alert to dangers, always mindful of the highly contagious nature of the sicknesses online. Okay, and then conclusion. So the social internet, it presents some unique challenges to the church in regards to false teaching. And unlike what we saw in the history of the church, there's no church council today that can rule on, what we should or shouldn't do online. And it's impossible for the leaders to track what everyone's engaging with online. But however, as with all things, scripture is sufficient for life and godliness. So I would say the primary issue with false teaching spreading online is not the content of the teaching or even how we're supposed to refute it, but it's the nature of the social internet, that it's a spectacle. It is shaping us to value temporary novel pleasures that don't satisfy us, but it keeps us longing for more. So come get Proverbs 27:20. I guess we go here. Yes.
Verse 27. Verse 20. Verse 20 says, Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied, and never satisfied are the eyes of a man.
So that's the thing, right? We are people who can't take our eyes off the screen. You see people walking around just staring at the screen, or people are driving staring at the screen. And so that is the biggest problem with the internet, that it's a spectacle that we can't keep our eyes off. Tony Rinke, he actually wrote a whole book on it. It's called Competing Spectacles. And he explained how we are living in the age of the spectacle of manufactured images and illusions. But however, God in his mercy, he's given us the world's greatest spectacle, which is the cross of Christ. So this is to be at the center of our preaching. So whoever's next. Can you get 1 Corinthians chapter 1, 22 to 24?
For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, at a stumbling block to Jews and to Gentile. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God.
Mhm. So at the center of our preaching is Christ crucified. And he talks about how this is the power of God and the wisdom of God. And it's not just at the center of our preaching, but Christ crucified is what we remember at the Lord's table. That the bread and the juice represent Christ's body and blood. And also at our baptism, that as we're going in and out of the water, we're remembering Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. So this is a spectacle that God gave us, that this is what we should be setting our minds on. And this spectacle is for the eyes of the heart. So when we're thinking about this, we're not just picturing, the Jesus from the Jesus movie or from The Chosen or whoever. This is for the heart, not for the eyes. And we are to be a people who walk by faith and not by sight, setting our minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. And this is the definition of faith. So actually, let's get to all three of those. So Daniel, you want to get Hebrews 11:1?
Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen.
Mhm. So faith is about things that are not seen. Mike, you want to get First Peter?
Though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not now see him, you believe in him and rejoice with him that is inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls.
Mhm. And John 20:20.
Jesus said to him, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen me, who have not seen and yet have believed.
Mhm. So our focus on the Christian life is on the things that are unseen. So instead of, this thing that's right in front of us that makes us stare at it all day long, what God is calling us to do is focus on the things that are not seen, things that are eternal. And the ultimate end goal of faith, the culmination of our journey towards God is the beatific vision. When we'll see God, Christ and be like him. 1 John 3:2-3.
Okay,
This was actually in our call to worship this morning.
different, we are now difference that, oh, wait a minute, okay. Difference. Now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. It's on my phone, is different. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. All who have this hope in him purify themselves just as he is pure.
So what we're looking forward to is when Jesus appears, and when he appears, we would be like him because we see him as he is. So that is the beatific vision. What our hope is that, one day we will see Christ and we'll be like him, and we'll be in the presence of God for all of eternity. We'll experience perfect bliss, knowledge, and community. So, bliss, knowledge, and community is everything social media promises, but it doesn't deliver on it. But as a believer, this is what we're looking forward to, that God is actually going to deliver this to us. And, if you want to learn more about the beatific vision, our next class on the doctrine of God, the attributes of God, we're actually going to start out with the beatific vision. So that's the ultimate end of social media, that, yes, all of this teaching spreads online, whether we are seeking it out intentionally or not. And it's all about the visuals, it's all about a spectacle, and God has already given us a solution to that. So it's not just something that, showed up 20 or 30 years ago, but the spectacle has always been there. even back in Roman times, when the New Testament was written, their spectacle was going into the arena and watching the races and the gladiators fighting and all of that, and, there's plenty of early Christian literature which was written against that. And then in like Puritan times, it was all about the drama and people going to watch plays. And the Puritans had a lot of literature writing against that. And it's been part of our tradition that, there's always been the temptation to worship statues. Intentionally, unintentionally, we're all about worshiping visual things. And Christians have always been fighting against it, and social media is just, our generation's thing. Which is the spectacle that, we are tempted to worship, and God has already given us the tools to fight it. Right, so that is all I had, so. James, so you want to close this?
Sure. Gracious Lord, just thanks for the time to be able to think about these things of what we start desiring and start putting our lusts after instead of going after you. May we not get distracted by false things of community and false things of pleasure, but to seek to know you and be like you. You see me?